She woke before the sun, as she always did, feeling the cool earth beneath her feet and the quiet breath of the land around her. Her life had always followed the same gentle rhythm: mornings spent gathering roots, leaves, and healing plants; afternoons helping elders and children; evenings listening to stories beside the fire. She carried pride in who she was and where she came from, and she trusted the land more than any stranger. That morning felt different, though. The air felt heavy, as if the hills were holding their breath. She walked farther than usual, following a patch of rare herbs that grew near the open plains where her people rarely lingered. She told herself she would be quick. She did not know that one step beyond the familiar path would change everything. As she knelt to gather the plants, she heard the sound of wheels against dry ground. She looked up, startled. A large wagon stood not far away, and beside it was a man she had never seen before. His clothes were worn, but clean. His eyes studied her in a way that made her uneasy. He spoke in a calm voice, asking if she lived nearby. She answered carefully, giving little away. He said he needed help, and that he had traveled a long way. He spoke of sickness at his ranch, and said no one else knew the land well enough to find healing plants. His words sounded polite, yet something beneath them felt wrong. She stepped back, clutching her bundle, and told him she could not go with him. The change in him was sudden. His voice hardened and his eyes narrowed. He said she had no choice, and reached for her arm. She tried to pull away, but he was stronger. The fear rose fast and sharp inside her chest. She shouted, but the plains swallowed her voice. He forced her onto the wagon and took the reins. The horses moved quickly, carrying her farther from everything she knew. She watched the land pass by, tears burning her eyes. Yet she refused to let them fall. She memorized the direction of the sun, the shape of distant hills, anything that might help her find her way back. The journey felt endless. She was not bound yet. She felt trapped by distance and fear. The man barely spoke, only telling her she would understand. Soon she did not believe him. Every mile made her heart heavier, and her thoughts darker. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was low. The place was larger than she imagined, with wide fences, long buildings, and fields stretching far into the distance. It felt empty and lonely despite its size. Few workers moved slowly, keeping their heads down. None looked her in the eye. He led her inside a small building and told her she would stay there. She asked why he had brought her there and what he wanted from her. He avoided her gaze and said she was needed and that leaving was not an option. His words chilled her more than any threat. That night she sat alone, listening to the wind outside and the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Her mind raced with questions and fear, but beneath it all a quiet strength began to grow. She reminded herself who she was and where she came from. She had survived harsh winters, hunger, and loss. She would survive this too. She did not yet know what waited for her at that ranch, or why fate had dragged her there by force, but as she lay awake watching shadows move across the walls, she sensed that the truth would be more shocking than the journey itself, and that her life would never return to the simple rhythm she once knew. She woke to the sound of horses and the creak of doors. The room smelled of hay and earth. It was small and plain, with only a thin mattress and a wooden table. She stretched her body stiff from the long ride and tried to understand the place she had been brought to. The walls felt cold, and the air heavy. She missed the wind and the open plains where she had always felt free. She was told to follow the man to the fields. He walked ahead silently, and she noticed the workers glancing at her with curiosity and caution. She kept her head down and followed, not knowing what was expected of her. The land was vast, with long rows of crops and fenced pastures. The sun beat down, and the wind carried the dry dust across her skin. She had worked in her village helping with gardens and tending animals, but this was different. Everything moved faster here, and the work was harder. Her first task was to gather the herbs in the morning sun. She moved carefully, learning the new patterns of the plants. The man watched her closely, but said nothing. She sensed his impatience and tried to work quickly, even as fear twisted her stomach. She realized that every movement mattered and that failure might bring punishment. She focused on the plants and the rhythm of her own hands. To keep her mind from spinning, with worry at noon, they brought her food. It was simple bread and water. She had learned to eat simply, but the quiet made her nervous. She kept glancing around, trying to see the workers and understand their lives. She noticed that some avoided her gaze, while others seemed kind but silent. She wondered what stories they carried, and whether any had been brought here. As she wanted to speak, but the man had warned her to obey, and not question. Days passed. Slowly, she began to learn the routine of the ranch. The work was hard and often lonely. She carried water-fed animals and helped wherever she was told. Some days she worked from sunrise until sunset. Her hands became calloused and her feet sore. She learned to watch the skies, to predict the weather, and to move carefully around the animals. She remembered the ways her people had taught her to listen to nature, and she used that knowledge to make her work easier. She also began to notice strange things. The workers spoke in hushed voices when they thought she was not listening. She heard the man arguing over money and supplies. She saw deliveries that arrived late at night, and trucks leaving without explanation. She felt unease creeping. In her heart told her that there was more to this ranch than simple farming. Her fear deepened, but so did her curiosity. Tried to connect with the workers slowly. She smiled at the older ones who nodded back. She learned small pieces of their names and histories. They were cautious at first, but began to trust her little by little. She realized she was not completely alone, even in this strange and frightening place. Some shared stories of their lives in towns far away. Some spoke of families and homes they missed. She listened quietly, storing each detail and feeling a small spark of hope. Night, she returned to the small room and thought of her village. She missed the sounds of the wind, the fire, and the voices of her people. She wrote symbols and notes in the dirt on the floor to remember her thoughts. She planned and imagined escape, but also reminded herself to be patient. There was danger here, and rushing would bring harm. She needed to understand everything before she acted. Slowly, she began to see the patterns of life at the ranch. The man was strict and controlling. He demanded obedience and watched closely for mistakes. He rarely smiled, and his words were sharp. She learned to move carefully around him to avoid anger. She also learned to watch and listen to the other workers. They taught her secret paths and safe spots. She began to feel a quiet confidence forming inside her. One afternoon, she noticed a group of men unloading crates. She watched from a distance. As the man gave strict instructions, she could not see inside the boxes, but sensed tension. She felt a knot in her stomach. She wanted to ask, but knew it was dangerous. She returned to her work with her mind racing. She realized that her life had changed completely. She was no longer in the open fields of her home. She was part of a new world with rules she did not yet understand. Even in fear, she began to grow stronger. She learned to use her hands for more than work. She memorized the routes between buildings and the times when the man left the ranch. She learned which workers could be trusted and who kept secrets. She began to plan quietly in her mind. She would not give up, and she would not be forgotten. She would survive and find a way to return to her people, or at least 2 safety nights were hardest. She lay awake listening to the wind rustling through the fences and the distant sounds of animals. She thought of the life she had known and the people she loved. She whispered to herself stories of courage and strength. Her body was tired, but her spirit refused to rest. She promised herself she would find out the truth of the ranch, no matter how long it took. She began to see that survival required not just endurance, but also understanding. By the end of the first week, she felt a small shift inside her. She moved with more confidence and began to notice details she had missed before. She understood the rhythm of the workers and the timing of tasks. She realized that the ranch was not only a place of fear, but also a place where she could learn and prepare. She resolved to watch carefully and to trust her instincts. She had been taken from her home, but she was not helpless. She would face this world one step at a time, and she would endure no matter what challenges came next. She had begun to feel the rhythm of the ranch, but something still did not sit right. There were whispers in the air that did not belong to the wind or the animals she had learned to watch and listen. And now she noticed things that the man tried to hide. One evening, she was cleaning the small room she stayed in, when she saw a folded letter under the table. The paper was old, and the writing hurried. She opened it carefully, even though she knew it was dangerous. The words spoke of money owed, goods moved secretly, and people being sent away without notice. Her heart pounded as she read. She realized that the ranch was not what it seemed, and that the man had been lying about why he brought her here. She spent the next few days observing more closely every delivery, every conversation, Every movement of the workers she noted in her mind. She saw trucks come late at night with crates that no one spoke about. She overheard men talking and hushed voices about payments and debts. She began to understand that the ranch was involved in something illegal, and that the danger was far greater than she imagined. The workers were still cautious around her, but she noticed small gestures of kindness. One man left extra water for her, another gave her a piece of bread when she worked late. They spoke to her quietly, sharing warnings about the man. She listened carefully and stored every piece of advice in her mind. She realized she could not trust everyone, but some might help if she chose the right moment. She also learned about the other people who had been brought to the ranch. Some were there for work, some had been forced. She could see fear in their eyes and the way they moved quietly. To avoid attention, she felt a deep connection with them, even though she did not know their names. She wanted to find a way to help them. Even as she worried for herself, the man became more strict as he sensed her attention to details. He asked questions she could not answer and watched her movements. She learned to appear obedient. While keeping her mind sharp, she moved carefully through the fields, tending animals, gathering herbs, and carrying water. But she never stopped observing. She memorized patterns of the day, the times when the man left the main house, and when the deliveries arrived. One afternoon, she found a hidden path behind a storage building. She followed it slowly, keeping low. Her heart raced as she saw crates stacked high with labels that did not make sense. She peeked inside one and saw tools and papers and goods that were not meant to be seen. She realized the ranch was hiding much more than she had imagined. She went back to her room, thinking carefully about what she had seen at night. She lay awake planning. She thought about how she could find help or escape without putting herself in danger. She considered writing messages or leaving signs for the workers she trusted. She also thought about how the rancher would react if he discovered her knowledge. She knew she had to be careful. Patience was her greatest ally. Days turned into weeks, and she began to understand the lives of the workers. She listened to their stories and learned small details about the ranch. She discovered that some had been there for years, and some had only recently arrived. She saw fear in their eyes, and yet also determination to survive. She felt a quiet respect for their endurance, and it strengthened her own courage. Notice the small acts of defiance that others showed, even in fear. Some hid small items from the man. Others helped each other quietly. She realized she was not alone in wanting change. She began to speak quietly to those she trusted, offering advice and listening to theirs. They formed a silent network of understanding that gave her hope. She also began to understand the man more clearly. He was controlling and feared being questioned. He watched for signs of rebellion and punished quickly those who tried to resist. Quietly suffered. Her fear was real, but she refused to let it control her. She decided that knowledge and patience were her weapons, and she used them carefully. Ranch held many secrets, and she was learning each one slowly. She mapped the buildings, memorized the schedules, and noticed the moments when the workers were alone or together. She thought about the risks of speaking too soon or acting too fast. She knew she needed proof of what was happening, and she began to gather small pieces of evidence in her mind. Her courage grew with each discovery. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She knew the truth would shock her community and perhaps even bring justice. She realized that her role had changed from a passive observer to someone who could act. She also understood the importance of waiting for the right moment. The days were long and the nights were restless. She would lie awake listening to the wind and imagining the life she wanted for herself. And for the workers, she whispered to herself reminders of strength and courage. She knew that what she had seen at the ranch was only the beginning, and that the coming days would test her in ways she had never imagined. Despite the fear she felt small victories, she had discovered the truth. She had found allies, and she had grown stronger. She understood that survival was not only about avoiding harm, but about seeing clearly and thinking ahead. She knew that the shocking discoveries at the ranch would demand bravery and intelligence. She was preparing herself for the challenges to come. She had learned much about the ranch and the people who lived and worked there. The secrets she had uncovered weighed heavily on her mind. She could no longer ignore the truth she had seen. She knew that the rancher's control was cruel and that the workers lived in fear. She also knew that she had to act carefully, or everything could be lost each day. She moved with caution, observing everything. Around her, she memorized the paths between buildings and the timing of the ranchers' walks. She noticed when the gates were open and when the horses were fed. She saw which workers were loyal to the rancher and which quietly resisted. She began to understand the patterns that governed the place and use them to plan small acts of defiance. She began by helping the workers in secret. She shared knowledge about the herbs that could heal small injuries and offered words of encouragement. She moved quietly between tasks, leaving small signs and notes that gave hope to those who were afraid. She learned to read their gestures and expressions to understand who could be trusted. One morning she overheard a conversation between the rancher and one of the workers about shipments and payments. She listened carefully, hiding behind a stack of crates. She understood that the rancher was moving goods illegally and that some workers were being punished for refusing to help. She felt a surge of fear, but also a sense of determination. She realized that knowing the truth gave her power even in the midst of danger. She began to create a secret plan. She mapped the buildings in her mind, noting all exits and hidden spaces. She learned the routines of the workers and which ones could act as allies. She thought about how she could alert authorities or outsiders. Without being discovered, she knew that patience was key and that rushing would put everyone at risk. During her tasks, she noticed small opportunities. She slipped messages into pockets and left marks that could guide trusted workers. She listened to conversations and memorized details about shipments and the movement of goods. She began to piece together a larger picture of what the rancher was hiding. She also learned how to avoid suspicion by pretending to follow orders while thinking ahead, though. Workers began to notice her quiet courage. She never boasted or acted brashly, but they saw the way she moved carefully. Yet decisively, she shared small pieces of information that helped them avoid punishment or complete tasks more safely. She became a silent leader among them, and they began to trust her judgment. She felt a quiet pride in her growing influences. The days passed. She grew more confident. She understood the rancher's moods and the signals of his anger. She knew when it was safe to move and when to stay hidden. She used her knowledge of the land and the buildings to create safe spaces where messages and small items could be kept. She taught herself to read the subtle signs of danger and to act with precision. One afternoon, she discovered a hidden room behind a storage area. She had noticed a loose board and followed it to a small space filled with papers and ledgers. She carefully studied the documents, noting shipments and payments. She realized that the rancher had been hiding records of his operations. She copied what she could in her mind, remembering every detail for the future. She also began to build a quiet network of trusted workers. She learned their stories and shared her own quietly. She found that small acts of kindness and understanding created loyalty. She taught them to move carefully and watch for signs of danger. She reminded them that patience and observation were as powerful as strength and courage. At night, she reflected on her progress. She thought about the risks she had taken and the lessons she had learned. She realized that fear could be transformed into focus and determination. She whispered reminders to herself about her purpose and the people she hoped to protect. She knew that she would need all her courage for the challenges ahead. She began to test small actions. She left small messages that guided workers to safety. She moved quietly through the buildings. Observing and learning, she discovered the times when shipments were moved and when the rancher would be distracted. She used these moments to gather more information and to prepare for larger actions. The workers began to respond. They shared information with her and helped each other quietly. They avoided punishment by following her subtle guidance. She felt the power of community and the strength that came from careful planning and trust. She understood that courage alone was not enough, but that intelligence and patience could create change. She also learned to watch the rancher without being seen. She observed his habits and his anger. She noticed when he doubted his workers and when he became careless. She used this knowledge to predict his movements and to protect herself and the others. As she realized that understanding him was as important as understanding the land. Days turned into weeks, and her confidence grew. She knew that the moment to act would come, but that she must wait for the right time. She continued to gather information to ensure that when the moment arrived, she would have proof of the ranchers. Indeed, she understood the importance of careful planning and the danger of acting too soon. Her heart remained strong, even in fear. She kept her mind focused on the people who could be helped. She whispered encouragement to herself and to those she trusted. She learned that courage could grow quietly, and that patience was a weapon as strong as any physical defense. The ranch became a place of quiet resistance. She moved among the workers, helping them avoid punishment and preparing for the day. When the truth could be revealed, she kept careful records in her mind, noting everything important. She understood that the shocking revelations of the ranchers' actions would require courage and intelligence to confront. She was ready to face them when the time came, and she knew that her strength and careful planning would guide her and the others through the trials ahead. The day began quietly, with the first light spilling over the fields. She had spent weeks preparing herself and the workers for what was coming. The hidden messages had been delivered, and small signs left to guide trusted people to safety. She had memorized the movements of the rancher and the routines of the workers. She felt her heart beating fast but steady. She knew that patience had brought her this far, and now the moment was near. She moved carefully through the buildings, checking that everyone was in place. She whispered words of encouragement to those who needed reassurance. Their eyes reflected trust and hope. She reminded them to follow the plan exactly as it had been discussed. She had studied every corner of the ranch, every path and every hidden space. She knew where danger could strike and where safety lay when the rancher appeared. She pretended to work as usual. She carried water to the fields and adjusted her tasks according to his movements. She had learned to appear obedient, even while every thought in her mind was focused on the plan. She knew he was suspicious, but she moved with confidence and calm. Her eyes never lingered too long on him, and her actions were careful and deliberate. The right moment, she signaled to the workers through a small series of gestures they understood without words. They moved quickly and quietly, helping each other reach safe areas. She stayed close, watching for the rancher, but avoiding his notice. Her mind cataloged every detail, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Lead one worker to a hidden room where important documents had been kept. She had memorized the contents and guided him to gather the evidence without making noise. The papers told the full story of the illegal shipments and the exploitation of workers. She felt a surge of relief, knowing that the proof existed to stop the rancher and protect the people who had suffered. The rancher began to notice movement that he did not understand. He shouted instructions and demanded answers. She stayed calm, pretending to follow his orders while guiding the others to safety. She had prepared for this moment, and every action was precise and deliberate. She understood the importance of timing and trust. She knew that panic would ruin everything outside the main building. She signaled to those who were ready to leave. She had found a hidden path through the fences and past the horses. She had memorized the terrain so they could escape without being seen. She felt the wind on her face and the soft earth under her feet as she led the way. Her heart raced with fear, but also with the certainty that they were close to freedom's end. Workers hesitated for fear of being caught, but she whispered encouragement and reminded them of the plan. She saw the trust and courage in their eyes. She realized that the bonds they had built quietly over weeks had created strength that could overcome fear. She felt proud of the community they had formed, even in the midst of danger. Rancher grew angry as he realized his control slipping. He tried to find the people who had disappeared, but she stayed just out of sight, guiding everyone safely. She used every lesson she had learned about the rancher's habits and weaknesses to avoid detection. She moved silently, keeping watch and directing others. With small signals and gestures, by midday, most of the workers had reached the safe areas she had identified. The hidden documents had been retrieved, and all evidence was in place to alert authorities. She took one last look at the ranch, knowing that she had changed the balance of power. She had turned fear into careful action and courage into strategy. She understood that intelligence and patience had been as important as bravery. The authorities arrived. The rancher was taken by surprise. He could not deny the evidence or the testimony of the workers. She had prepared everyone to speak and act confidently. She remained calm and collected, guiding the authorities through the hidden areas. She realized that all the weeks of observation, preparation, and quiet courage had led to this moment. The rancher was removed, and the illegal operations were shut down. The workers who had been trapped and afraid were free. She watched them as they stepped into the sunlight for the first time. In weeks, some laughed and some cried, but all of them felt the weight of freedom. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that her careful planning had protected so many lives. She returned to the small room where she had first arrived at the ranch. She touched the walls and the floor, remembering the fear and the uncertainty. She realized how much she had grown during her time there. She had faced danger and discovered strength she did not know she had. She had learned patience, courage, intelligence, and leadership in the most difficult circumstances. Is she prepared to leave the ranch for good? She walked through the fields one last time, feeling the wind on her face. She thought about the people she had helped and the lives that would now be safer. She understood that survival was not only about enduring hardship, but also about observing, learning, and acting at the right moment. She returned to her village, eventually carrying the stories of courage and resilience she was welcomed with curiosity and respect. She shared what she could safely, telling of the lessons learned about strength, patience, and the importance of helping others. She had survived a world she had never known and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to live her life fully. Even as she settled back into the rhythm of her home, she carried the memory of the ranch with her. The fear had not disappeared completely, but it had been transformed into a quiet confidence. She knew that she could face challenges and protect those who could not protect themselves. She understood the power of careful observation and thoughtful action. She knew that the shocking discoveries she had made had changed her life forever. In the end, she realized that courage was not always loud or immediate. It could be quiet, patient, and careful. She had used her mind and her spirit to guide herself and others. Through danger, she had turned fear into preparation and knowledge. Into action, she understood that true strength came from within, and that, even in the darkest circumstances, a person could find a way to bring light. The story of her time at the ranch became a memory of endurance and bravery. She had been dragged into a world she did not understand, but she had faced it and emerged victorious. She had discovered not only the secrets of the ranch, but also the depth of her own resilience and courage. She carried those lessons with her forever, knowing that no challenge could break the spirit of a determined heart. She woke before sunrise, as she had done for many years, but this morning felt different. She stretched and felt the cool earth beneath her feet. The rhythm of her village life welcomed her, yet her mind lingered on the events that had changed everything. The ranch, the man, the secrets, and the courage she had discovered all felt like a distant storm now settled into memory. She walked slowly toward the river that curved through the village. The water flowed clear and steady, carrying reflections of the sky. She knelt and cupped her hands, taking the cool liquid to her lips. She thought about the workers who had been freed and the lives that had been restored. She thought about the hidden rooms, the papers she had memorized, and the careful plan that had brought justice. She felt a quiet pride knowing that her courage had mattered. Village stirred with activity. She saw children running to gather firewood and elders preparing the morning meal. The sounds of daily life reminded her of the simple rhythm she had once known, yet she felt a new strength within her. She had faced fear and discovered resilience. She had learned to act carefully and to trust her own judgment. She understood now that life could be fragile, but also that it could be shaped with patience and courage. She spent the morning walking among the trees and fields near her home. She observed the shapes of the land, the flow of the wind, and the sounds of birds. She had always appreciated nature, but now she saw it with new eyes. The lessons from the ranch had sharpened her awareness, and she noticed details she had once overlooked. She felt a connection to the land deeper than before, as if it had been waiting to remind her of who she truly was. When she returned to the village, she spoke quietly with those who had gathered near the central fire. She shared stories of survival and careful planning. She did not speak of danger in a way that would frighten them, but of courage that could be found in quiet observation and thoughtful action. She told them that strength could grow from patience and careful understanding. She saw the eyes of young women and men widen as they absorbed her words. She felt a deep responsibility to pass on What she had learned in the days that followed, she began to take small steps to help her community. She guided others in using the land wisely and gathering herbs and tending crops. She taught ways to observe and anticipate danger. She shared her knowledge of careful planning and quiet courage. She helped the village see that even small actions could make a difference, and that understanding the world around them could protect them from harm. She also spent time reflecting alone in the hills. She thought about the fear she had felt at the ranch and how it had been transformed into careful action. She remembered the workers and the quiet acts of kindness that had built trust. She understood now that courage was not always loud or immediate, but often patient, deliberate, and unseen. She felt a deep respect for the strength that comes from preparation and understanding. As Jay met with elders and shared lessons learned from the challenges she had faced, she spoke of the importance of community, of helping each other, and of noticing the hidden signs in the world. She told them how observation and patience had allowed her to act at the right moment. She emphasized that courage alone was not enough, that wisdom and careful thought must accompany. The village began to change slowly in response to her guidance. People moved more carefully through the forests and fields. They shared knowledge and watched for signs of danger. They helped each other quietly and learned to trust gestures and small signals. They began to see the strength in community and the power. In preparation, her experiences at the ranch had become a living lesson for everyone. She found herself teaching young women and men the skills she had learned. She guided them in using their senses to understand the land, in reading the weather, and in observing the actions of others. She taught them to anticipate challenges and to respond with patience and intelligence. She emphasized that strength could be quiet and that bravery could be shown in small but deliberate actions. In the evening, she would sit by the river and reflect. She thought of the rancher and the hidden rooms and the documents she had memorized. She remembered the fear and the tension and the courage she had found within herself. She felt gratitude for the lessons that had been difficult but transformative. She understood that her journey had prepared her not only to survive but also to guide and protect others. She began to write stories on thin pieces of bark using simple markings. She documented the lessons of observation, courage, and patience. She hoped that others could read and learn from them. She wanted the knowledge to continue beyond her own lifetime. She felt a deep responsibility to pass on the wisdom gained through experience and careful action. As months passed, she watched the village grow stronger and more aware. People moved with purpose and understanding. They observed the land and each other. They learned to act with care and courage. She felt satisfaction in seeing the subtle changes. She understood that even small improvements could create lasting safety and resilience. She spent time teaching children to notice details and to trust their instincts. She guided them in understanding the patterns of the land and the people around them. She told stories of courage without fear and of patience without weakness. She emphasized the value of quiet strength and careful thought. She saw them listening and learning and felt hope for the future. One day she climbed the hill overlooking the village. She looked at the fields, the river, and the homes. She thought about the ranch and the journey that had begun with fear and ended in knowledge and courage. She realized that the trials she had faced had given her a gift. She had learned to act wisely, to lead quietly, and to trust her own strength. She felt a deep peace knowing she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. She continued to walk among the trees and fields, learning every day from the land and the people. She understood that life would always hold difficulties, but that careful observation, courage, and patience could guide anyone through. They could find safety and strength even in the darkest circumstances. She felt gratitude for the lessons learned and for the power of quiet resilience. Her story became part of the village memory. She shared it in small ways through guidance, teaching, and example. She never boasted but lived each day with awareness and care. She helped others see that courage was not only in bold action, but in patient preparation and thoughtful observation. She felt joy in seeing people act wisely and help each other. She understood that the greatest power lay in the mind and the heart. As she grew older, she remained a quiet guide for her people. She walked the hills, the fields, and the river, observing the world with care. She taught. Protected and inspired, she carried the memory of the ranch, the fear, the courage, and the lessons learned. She understood that life would continue to test people in new ways. but that patience, wisdom, and quiet courage would always create a path. Forward Evan, as she rested by the river at the end of each day, she thought of the workers. She had saved the documents she had memorized and the careful actions that had brought freedom. She understood that true strength comes from preparation, observation, and the courage to act at the right moment. She had turned fear into wisdom and danger into guidance. She knew that the life she had built after the ranch was richer, stronger, and full of purpose. She realized that her journey had not ended with leaving the ranch. It continued every day in teaching, guiding, and protecting. She understood the value of patience, observation, and quiet action. She had learned that courage could be gentle, careful, and deliberate. She carried those lessons always in her heart, sharing them with those who would listen and learn. She woke early as usual, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. She stepped outside and inhaled the fresh air. Her eyes wandered across the village, the fields, the river, and the hills that had always been part of her life. She had returned home. Yet she felt different, as if the experiences she had endured had reshaped her very being. She carried memories of fear, courage, and careful planning, all intertwined with the rhythm of her own heart. The villagers noticed her changed presence. Though she moved and spoke in the same gentle way, they could see the strength that now lay beneath her calm exterior. Children gathered. When she walked through the paths and listened intently to her words, they could feel the quiet confidence she held and the wisdom that came from experience. She spoke of the land, the wind, the river, and the importance of observation, teaching them to notice small details and understand the world around them. She began to help the elders and younger women with tasks that went beyond the ordinary. She showed them how to prepare the herbs not only for healing, but for preserving their properties. She guided the planting of crops and the care of animals with patience and foresight. She reminded them to watch for signs in the sky and the soil, to anticipate changes and challenges. She shared stories, not of fear, but of careful courage and the value of thinking ahead each day. She walked the fields, observing the growth of plants and the movement of animals. She noticed small things that others overlooked. The shape of a leaf could indicate rain. The behavior of a bird could warn of approaching danger. She taught the villagers to respect these signs and to act with thought rather than panic. She showed them that knowledge gained from watching and listening was a form of strength that could protect them from harm. She spent long hours with the children, teaching them how to move quietly through the forests and along the river. They learned how to recognize tracks of animals, how to gather plants safely, and how to notice subtle changes in their surroundings. She told them stories of courage that did not rely on loud acts, but on careful observation and patient action. She emphasized that bravery was not always immediate, but often slow, deliberate, and quiet. At night, she would sit alone by the river, reflecting on the path she had walked. Her thoughts returned to the ranch, the hidden rooms, the papers she had memorized, and the workers who had trusted her. She thought about fear and how it could be transformed into careful planning. She understood that the trials she had faced had prepared her to guide and protect others in ways she had never imagined. Began to organize the villagers to work together on projects that strengthened the community. She helped them create safe paths through the forests and fields. She taught them to communicate with small signals and gestures that could be understood without words. She guided them in sharing knowledge, so that everyone became more aware and prepared. She noticed that as the community learned these skills, their confidence grew and fear diminished. One day, a group of travelers arrived at the village. They had been through difficult journeys and carried worry in their eyes. She welcomed them with care and observed their movements. She helped them find shelter and food and listened to their stories. She noticed patterns in their words that indicated danger or deceit. She guided them with quiet wisdom, ensuring that they felt safe and respected. She realized that the lessons she had learned at the tea ranch were now serving a purpose beyond her village. She also began to record the stories of those who had come to the village in simple symbols on bark and in the soil. She wanted the knowledge of courage, patience, and careful observation to be preserved. She told the villagers that these lessons could protect them and others in times of difficulty. She emphasized that memory and preparation were as important as action, and that wisdom could be shared across generations. As the seasons changed, she noticed how the land itself taught lessons. Each rainstorm, each dry spell, Each wind carried information. She guided the villagers to read these signs, to anticipate challenges, and to respond effectively. She taught them to work together, to protect crops and animals, and to avoid dangers that might threaten their safety. She showed them that cooperation and understanding created a strength far greater than fear. The children grew attentive to details they had once ignored. They noticed the color of the soil, the direction of the wind, and the sounds of the river. They learned to move quietly through the forests and to understand the signs left by animals in nature. She encouraged them to ask questions and to observe before acting. She reminded them that courage was not about recklessness, but about preparation and careful thought. She also spent time helping young adults understand how to protect themselves in situations of danger. She shared strategies she had used at the ranch, showing how observation could reveal truth and deceit. She encouraged them to trust their instincts. While thinking ahead, she demonstrated how small acts of careful courage could prevent harm and create opportunities. She showed that even when fear was present, it could be transformed into clear, decisive action. The elders watched her guidance and noticed the difference it made in the community. They saw people moving with confidence and awareness. They saw children growing stronger and wiser. They saw neighbors helping each other in ways they had not before. They recognized that her experience had brought lessons that were practical and powerful. They began to share her methods with other villages, ensuring that knowledge spread beyond one place. She continued to explore the land surrounding the village. She walked along the river, watching the patterns of water and wind. She climbed hills, observing the movement of animals and birds. She noticed subtle changes that predicted storms or other events. She shared these observations with the villagers, teaching them to read the land as she had learned to read the ranch. She explained that awareness and preparation could create safety and opportunities. She organized small groups to work on projects together. They repaired paths and fences. They prepared for planting seasons and harvests. They created signals and signs that allowed communication over distance. They learned to support each other and to act together when challenges arose. She taught them that collective action guided by careful observation and patient planning was more effective than fear or rash decisions. She also worked on creating a sense of trust and community among all members. She encouraged sharing stories of courage and experience. She reminded them that each person had knowledge and skills that could benefit others. She emphasized that observation, patience, and collaboration were tools everyone could use. She showed that courage did not require force, but wisdom and careful action. One afternoon, she noticed smoke rising from the far hills. She quickly assessed the situation using the skills she had taught. She guided villagers to gather tools and prepare safe routes. She signaled to those closest to the fire to move to safety. She organized teams to approach carefully with water and blankets to control the fire. She stayed calm and methodical, ensuring that every person knew their role and acted safely. The villagers followed her instructions with confidence. They moved quietly and efficiently and managed to control the fire before it spread further. She observed the success with a sense of quiet pride. She realized that the lessons of careful observation and preparation had saved lives and property. She understood that courage and wisdom combined could prevent disaster and strengthen community as the days passed. She continued to guide and teach. She worked with children, young adults, and elders. She encouraged the sharing of knowledge and skills. She emphasized patience and careful thought in all actions. She showed that danger could be faced with calm and strategy rather than panic. She reminded everyone that courage was a choice and that preparation was a path to safety. She also reflected on her own growth. She thought about the fear and uncertainty of the ranch and how it had shaped her. She recognized the strength she had gained and the lessons she could now share. She understood that her experiences had created a responsibility to guide and protect others. She embraced this role with humility and determination. She began to plan projects that would help the village long term. She worked on creating storage for crops and water. She taught methods of preserving food and resources. She encouraged teamwork and careful planning. She showed that preparation and awareness could create security and opportunity. She emphasized that every small action contributed to the strength and safety of the community. Through all seasons and years, she continued her work. She guided the village in understanding the land, the weather, and each other she taught. Children to observe adults, and adults to observe children. She emphasized that every person had value and that knowledge could be shared. She encouraged the practice of patience and careful action in all aspects of life. Her story spread beyond the village. People from neighboring areas came to learn from her. They observed her methods and listened to her guidance. They saw how courage could be quiet and careful. They learned that observation and preparation were powerful tools she welcomed. Vim and shared her knowledge generously. She also recorded the experiences of villagers and travelers in simple markings on bark and stones. She documented lessons of courage, patience, and careful planning. She emphasized the importance of memory. In teaching, she wanted the knowledge to last beyond her own life. She showed that wisdom gained through experience could protect and empower future generations. As she grew older, she continued to walk the land, observing every detail she noticed. Changes in the river, the wind, the soil, and the sky. She guided the villagers to act wisely in response. She reminded them that every detail mattered, and that preparation and awareness were keys to survival. She showed that courage and intelligence together could create a strong community. Her presence became a quiet guiding force. She did not command, but inspired. She did not force, but demonstrated. She showed through actions and careful teaching how to face challenges with intelligence and courage. She created a community that valued patience, observation, and thoughtful action above fear. She understood that strength came from the mind and heart as much as from the body. Through seasons of growth, change, and challenge, she remained steadfast. She guided the village through drought, storms, and illness. She helped people understand the signs of danger and the opportunities for action. She showed that careful observation and thoughtful preparation could save lives and create strength. She continued to teach and inspire generations who would follow her example. As she rested by the river at the end of each day, she thought of the workers she had saved at the ranch, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had discovered. Within herself, she knew that courage could be quiet, deliberate, and careful. She had turned fear into knowledge and danger into guidance. She had created a life of purpose and a community strengthened by observation, patience, and courage. Her legacy became the quiet wisdom of the village. She had shown that even in the most difficult circumstances, a person could find a way to act wisely and protect others. She had demonstrated that courage was not always loud or immediate, but patient, careful, and deliberate. She had transformed her experiences into knowledge, teaching, and community. She understood that her journey had not ended with the ranch, but continued every day in guiding and empowering others. The village flourished under the lessons she shared. People moved with confidence, observed the land and each other, and acted thoughtfully. They celebrated small victories and learned from challenges. They shared knowledge, crossed generations, and strengthened the bonds of their community. She watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the principles of courage, patience, and careful action would continue to protect and guide her people long after her time. She understood that her experiences had given her a responsibility. She embraced it fully, teaching, guiding, and inspiring. She showed that fear could be transformed into wisdom and courage, and that careful observation could create safety and opportunity. She had turned the hardships of her past into a living lesson for the future. She continued to walk the fields, the river, and the hills, observing, teaching, and protecting with quiet strength. She had learned that life was full of challenges, but that with patience, careful planning, and observation, any danger could be met and turned into opportunity. She showed that courage was not only in bold action, but in quiet thought and deliberate preparation. She continued to live with awareness, guiding her people and shaping the future through wisdom, care, and courage.